It's a delightful to be part of this next system convergence event leading to the teach-ins. Uh, Colin and I are with a research group called Leadership for the Ecozoic. Colin wears many hats. One of also is with the ICCA consortium, which you'll hear about in a bit, and that brings Grazia into the picture. And one thing we have in common is work around this topic of territories of life. So we want to just introduce that topic from different perspectives. This is a topic, Grazia Barini Feierabend, if I said that right. That's how my mother would say it, my German mother. Um, has been working on since the 1980s, and she helped create the ICCA consortium, a consortium of Indigenous peoples and local communities working on conserved and protected areas. In 2008, Colin is involved in that organization as well, and it's a great resource. Grazia also recently published this book, Territories of Life, or the book that she wrote, and worked with her co-author, Helmut Jaeger on has just come out recently. So we'll hear about that, and we're going to start with Grazia's big picture view, her long work with Territories of Life. We'll have some discussion, questions, and then Colin and I will talk about work that we're doing with the concept of territories of life in various research capacities at McGill University. So, Grazia, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Well, first of all, good afternoon to you. You are probably, most of you, around Montreal, and I'm here in Switzerland. It is getting evening. Most of my fellow Swiss have already had dinner and they are having a drink in front of television, most of them. And however, I am delighted being here and being with these two friends who have invited me to something that I love, which is talking about territories of life and talking about this book. And I'll do that fast enough because it took me the last 5 years to produce the book and many more years to produce the research, the thinking and the analysis. But I have not so long, so I think I have 15 or 20 minutes. So I share now my screen, if you allow me. And then let's see, should be up there. Yes. And now I have to merge a little bit my own view, and here I am. Sorry, I have to go back. Right, this is, can you hear me well? Can you see well the screen now?
It's very good.
Okay, so this is the book, and this is the title page. It is printed in not very many copies. You are lucky because if one of those falls on your feet, you're going to have troubles. It's a very heavy book, but it is available as a PDF in English and soon will be also available as a PDF in Spanish and in French. And here is the download. You can see it. I will show it also later on. Now, I would like to start by discussing some topics and how they evolved throughout actually my professional life and career. And I will bring you back to when I started the social policy program at the IUCN headquarters in Switzerland, not too far away from here. It was about the beginning of the 90s, and I've been working on these issues for quite some time. And wherever I went in IUCN, I hope you can see it at the very bottom of the screen, I heard about management. Management is what you do in a particular territory, let's say a protected areas, in order to achieve conservation. And especially if you do it in an effective way, this is good, effective management. Well, it took us about 10 years, and probably even a little bit more, to move from management to governance, figuring out not only about what to do, but who has the capacities and the right to do anything about it. And that allowed us to discuss diversity and quality of governance. I'll tell you more in a moment. And then moving from one protected areas with diversity and quality to a system of protected areas, landscape conservation, and in the landscape, not only the conservation that is run and organized by governments, but also voluntary and ancillary conservation. And from there on, not only protected areas, but also conserved areas. And vitality of governance, tell you more about it, from their custodianship and territories of life. Now this, in the oval, conserved areas, custodianship, vitality of governance, and territories of life is the topic of the book that I have just shown you before. And it is made of thinking and reflection and action and ideas that emerge in, let's say, the last 10, 15 years. 20 years ago, we already knew what governance was about. It was about taking decision, it was about implementing decision, and making as much effort as we could to make those decisions respected, of course, about protected and conserved areas. Well, diversity was answering the question, who takes those decisions and gets them respected? And quality was about figuring out what criteria are followed in taking, respecting, and implementing those decisions. However, there were other questions that we realized with time were as important, if not more important, that were not answered. The most interesting for me was this one. Is the institution that is actually governing a protected or conserved area, is the institution really excellent? Is it inspiring itself, inspiring others? Or is it, boring, apathetic, it doesn't do anything interesting? Has it been capable of evolving, responding to a context that changes all the time, that evolves all the time? And for how long has the institution been functioning, and for how long is it likely to remain functioning in the future? How long is going to be remaining capable of evolving and functioning? So all these questions we asked for the first time, really, in the stream of governance of the Sydney World Parks Congress in Australia in 2014. And we started encapsulating all those in the idea of vitality of governance. Now, vitality, as you understand, comes from the Latin vita. Vita means life. Everything that is full of life, everything that is healthy, vibrant, energetic. But with that, it always comes change, because you know from the very fact of breathing that you cannot, if you are alive, remain immobile, remain without any change. But being humans, as we are, life and change mean also that we seek for meaning. That is not life and change like that happening. We also want to find meaning in what we do. And of course, because we were at the World Parks Congress, we looked for that around the vitality of governance of the protected and conserved areas that encapsulate, that keep the best we have on the planet, the most important territories we have on the planet. So we came up with a working definition. There is vitality of governance when an institution that governs a protected areas or a conserved areas exhibit the capacity to function in excellent, in full ways, in inspiring ways for itself, but also for others, and is also capable of evolving under changing and possibly challenging circumstances. Okay, so we started with this, And we set up to learn. Many people set up to learn, interviews, all sorts of things. I set up to learn in the work that came up recently into this book that you have seen a moment ago. And so I tell you what I ended up thinking and doing. I started from history, reviewing the governance institutions in prehistory and history. Of course, the very distant history of the genus Homo, 3 million years, and then in the last million, we discover fire, we start controlling fire, selecting species. Some people even started moving across the ocean as big groups. And then in the Holocene, the last 12,000, 10,000 years, we have mobile communities of foragers, pastoralists increasing, then shifting cultivators, and then also settled communities, much more recently, let's say about for sure 5,000, 2,000 years ago. And we have monastic communities much closer to us who stayed in the same place for hundreds of years, for centuries, and also communities governing their commons. And lo and behold, we find that today, many of the areas where these people stayed and lived for a long, long time, we consider them conserved areas. We consider them as having integrity and very precious diversity. Much more recent to us, in the last 200, 100 years, think about this, time spans, state governments have started looking into, well, we need to be something ourselves as well. So let's set up institutions who identify areas that deserve protection, and let's get them to govern those areas, and we call them protected areas, and some of them include very interesting diversity. So in the book, there are plenty of cases, many more than 30, but 30 cases are looked at in some details, and I had lots of fun looking into those. And what I found there are 5 characteristics that are very often associated with governance vitality. I will not tell you about these characteristics because I want you to look into the book, and also because it will be too long and I don't have the time to do so. But I'll tell you something, that in order to have governance vitality, what you need is a ground of motivation and energy to function. And that motivation and energy always, always seems to come from a mix that has some biological purpose, like livelihood, survival, some conceptual meaning, like for today, we want to conserve biodiversity. We want to save this unique species of pangolins, and plenty of emotions. Even for the people among us who believe to be, very cool scientists, there is plenty of emotions. There is the emotion of some people who don't want to miss their job. There are emotions of people who want to show how good they are. And there are the emotions of people who say, well, my ancestors were buried in this land, and we need to care for this land in a very strong and effective way. What we also find is that this mix of purpose, meaning, and emotions are in a way necessary, and they're always as a mix, but they are not sufficient, because there could be plenty of external phenomena that can destroy what is there. What my work brought me to understand, however, is that exceptionally strong motivation and energy, the essence, what we say is vitality, is found in something we understand as custodianship. And custodianship is the collective intergenerational bond that you find between a community and its territory of life. And this is an affective relation. It is something that stays through time. It is made of caring. It is made of attention, deep attention. And some people talk about love straightforwardly for their territory. The best way I know to explain the difference is this. Here is a property. You can buy, you can sell it. It is your property. You don't give a damn, basically. Here is your heritage. It is part of your identity. It is your essential for your autonomy. You'll never think about selling it. Never. So this is what custodianship is about, is being about your own heritage. And more interesting still is that heritage is defining territories of life. Custodians not only are sustained, are maintained, are kept alive by their territories, but they create territories of life by their relation with that relation made of vital governance. And of course, you all also have heard about territories of life that are collectively governed, managed, and conserved by their custodians, and they are the heart of cultures throughout the world. Every anthropologist is in awe about what are the fantastic complexities of the cultures and their territories. However, we cannot say that everything is good and is working well today in the world. Really, we cannot. And in fact, what has happened in the last few hundred years is a set of processes that have been really creating what I can best call a clash between the custodians of territories of life and the hubris, the arrogance of modernity. Colonialism, neocolonialism, what we understand as development, have brought about a tremendous loss of biological and cultural diversity throughout the world. So what we see is that custodianship, beside this clash, has been for a long time invisible. And in the book, I've been looking for it and discovering, lo and behold, that in the last 50 years, there has been some understanding in international policy of the value of community conservation, what somehow is the translation for the policy world of custodianship. And in the book, you'll find in table 1, there is a chronology of key events, of policy decisions at the international and national levels, and not international in the table, and various publications. What you can also find at the same time is that you find increasingly visible what a phenomenon that I understand as commercialization of nature. And there are plenty of subsets in this phenomenon, but I would say that one major and interesting one is the idea that financial resources now are available to support community conservation. I would say that is more of a dream and plenty of promises than actual support. However, one could say that this is an excellent opportunity. You are actually helping custodians to conserve and to promote territories of life. Well, I would also say that possibly it can be a kiss of death. And my own analysis, and I think it's not only my own, it is other people's analysis, is that the difference is made in great part, not in total, but in great part, by the strength of the community, custodians of the territories of life, the strength and the capacity. Now, very quickly, I'll tell you that the book has other things. And so if you are interested, you can find them. There is an understanding of governance as systems for decision making. There is an analysis of plenty of other concepts vis-a-vis vitality of governance, concepts like resilience, adaptive social learning, sustainability, human. Another very interesting thing is about methodologies and tools to self-assess vitality. So if you are a body that is governing a protected or conserved areas, you may want to figure out how well we are doing. So there are tools and methodology to do that, and even question, even ideas to enhance vitality. Most interesting for me, there are also policies, ideas, and proposals for policies to support custodianship in territories of life. They're designed for governments who want to enhance vitality, but not just to give some money here and there as it is too easy to do, and in fact, sometimes only destructive. It is by securing the governance of willing and capable custodians. finally, there is something that I think could be useful in the book, which is a lexicon, is an innovative lexicon for so many of these words that are very scary, and they are utilized today by the professionals of conservation. So these are the contents of the book, but the key message of the book, if you agree with me that sustaining and regenerating as many territories of life as possible in conserved areas, but also within protected areas, well, you need two things. First, you need what many Indigenous scholars and many of those in Canada are actually promoting very strongly. You need endogenous self-strengthening, you need resurgence, you need decolonization, self-determination of the custodians. You also need policies that do not crash, do not destroy all this, that recognize and the custodianship of territories of life and possibly support it in appropriate ways, and while supporting social, environmental, and climate justice. And the two support one another. They cannot be really entirely without the other, because it is not meaningful to have a fantastic self-strengthening when there is a policy that crashes over you and destroys completely, like a war, as many we see today, or to have a policy but have not interested custodians. So now migrating a little bit into the ICCA consortium, because the ICCA consortium is the organization that united in trying to promote both the self-strengthening and the policies. And it is an association. It is based in Switzerland. It is a global association, and it is actually alive, has been alive for about 15 years now, but it is rooted in a much, much longer history of other predecessors who merged into the association and started in the 80s. So it was established in 2008 and legally registered in 2010. And right now there are about 90 countries represented, plus or minus, and the members are organizations and federations of custodian communities and other actors in civil society supporting them, other organizations, while the honorary members are individuals. Indigenous, non-Indigenous, members of communities, members of universities, everybody who has capacity, skills, and engagement for territories of life. The mission originally was to promote the appropriate recognition of territories of life and the appropriate support. But more recently, we have developed a manifesto for territories of life, which is much more complex. And the key concepts in the manifesto include what I just mentioned, this idea of resurgence, decolonization, custodian self-empowerment and self-determination, the idea that the custodians are not defined and agreed or not agreed by some expert somewhere. They are self-identified and they are recognized among networks of peers. This is something very important that we may want to discuss. The idea of collective rights and responsibility and collective good that is fundamental for custodianship and territories of life, wanting to restore and regenerate territories, wanting to prevent commercialization, militarization, and so on. The manifesto also discusses about defending, sustaining, and documenting territories of life. It discusses about the opportunity, but also the dangers of recognition and the need to seek justice, as I was saying, social, environmental, and climate justice. So very quickly, I'm finishing now. The work of the consortium has been going on for a number of years at local, national, regional, and international level. And at local level, we have focused on supporting grassroots processes of self-strengthening, self-awareness, capacity to really determine our proper future. And at the national level, it has been a focus on pulling together networks, having a critical mass for solidarity, for the recognition and support we were talking about, and for effective advocacy for the policies of the country. At the regional level, plenty of exchanges, learning, mutual support, sharing experiences. It has been extremely important to work at the regional level, and even more so, if I must say, at the international level. Well, the consortium has been looking for international policy recognition for all the goods that are produced by territories of life and their custodians, conservation of nature and culture, all that has to do with the mitigation and adaptation to climate change, food sovereignty, well-being, and you name it. We did so with a big push through publications. We had publications in different languages distributed all over the world. Most recently, we had these three multimedia products. One was in 2021, this Territories of Life with several very rich case examples. Then this in very many languages from Chinese to Kiswahili, a community-to-community guidance to strengthen your territories of life. And then most recently, this book that really encompasses much it all together. And as I said, you can download it. Before I leave you, I just wanted to say that there is an international registry held at the UNEP WCNC in Cambridge. Every custodian who is convinced about having a territory of life can upload the information, but it should be done with the peer support and review of fellows. There is also the consortium website. You can go and explore it. You can actually get lost there because you can go there for years. It is huge. And right now I'm finished. I give you all my thanks for your amazing kindness and attention. And this is the book again. And as I promised, here is the download link for all of you to take and enjoy. And it is for free. Thank you so much.
Wow. Thank you so much, Grazia. I have definitely gotten lost in the ICCA Consortium website. I am now getting lost with great pleasure in your book. I invite others to do that. You've given us so many things to think about and talk about, and so we'll open it up now to some questions and discussions. I believe Ben and others will help. I think you can raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. You can put things in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll try to mind all of those ways for you to get involved. So let's open the floor now for a bit before Colin and I talk about some work that we're doing. Don't wait for somebody else, folks. You could be the first person to engage here. Yes, you can raise your hand and be unmuted. Let me see if I hear. So we have a question. Is the project of Okalan and the Kurds an example of territories of life?
Well, it's a difficult question, but I happen to have worked for many, many years with a colleague of mine from India who is working very closely with the people working with Ocalan. And they are considering that what they work for is their territory of life. Of course, I have been able to touch only very, very quickly about territories of life because there are many qualifications to be discussed. You know, you have so-called defined territories of life who have the three characteristics, you know, of having the bond between the community custodians and the territory. They have a good organization that is set up for the governance, and they also have very good results for the environment and for the people. So these are the three characteristics of territories of life, and you say this is defined. But many territories of life, because of what I briefly mentioned of the clash with colonization, with all sorts of so-called modernity that has come about, bringing certain powers to take over others, well, they have disrupted territories of life. So you have disrupted, or you have even desired territories of life. So it's a answer that I would tell you would likely be possible only if you get there, you talk with the people, you see with them, and see what they think about themselves. Do we have a territory of life here? I suspect yes, but I cannot say about someone else. You know, we can in many ways try to help them to have their territories of life and defend them if we can, even from our positions. I certainly believe that Palestinians have their territories of life in Palestine.
It, I had a question, and I think it's linked to this, and you had hinted at it in your remarks, Grazia. And this was this question about self-identification. So you're echoing that again and saying that you really need the community to do that. So there seemed to be a bit of a backstory, or maybe some experience that calls that out is very important. And so, what is that backstory? In other words, what are some of the challenges or dissonance or discords that led to saying, no, this really is how it must be done?
You mean must be done in terms of
Self-identification by the
self-identification? Oh, yes. Okay, let me tell you, because it's a personal story and it is very, very interesting. At the very beginning, for me, at the very beginning of the life of the consortium, the president of the consortium was Tagi Farbar, was well a unique individual. He spoke 7 languages, originally from Iran, but the South American colleagues would say that he was the Latin American who spoke best Persian in the world, those sorts of things. And with him, we were invited to be at UNEP WCMC in Cambridge, where they have these lists of protected areas and others, including now territories of life. And the idea was that, like for protected areas, you submit your listing, and then there are some experts. Usually, if you are from a government, the experts come from the same governments. But in the case of territories of life, the idea was that some expert would come and, say, oh, well, yes, this is or this is not a territory of life. And so Tagi and I really for a long time fought quite hard to say, hey, wait a moment, we are not talking about the same kind of animal, beast, whatever you want to call it. We are talking about something else that needs to go through a different process of recognition that is mutual. So the best thing would be to have self-identification as custodians of a territory of life, and to create networks so that different custodians support one another and recognize mutually what they do. But we put the word support before recognition and before, of course, evaluation, which is not even to be mentioned, because this is the practice that really we would like to see, and seems to be much more consonant to the practice of indigenous peoples and community custodians throughout the world. So it is a challenge, because it is difficult already to have some sort of a defined and really all perfect territory of life. Imagine a network of all understanding and all, ready to support and help peers. However, it is the vision. It is what the consortium as a whole in its manifesto has decided to look for in the future, or in the present as well, but even more so in the future. So I'm not sure that I gave you the reasoning for it, but the the years of very strong advocacy that we carried out at UNEP WCMC, which is a great organization, but has a forma mentis of governments. Think like a state, if you know what I mean. It's different than what we understand it being the best for territories of life and their custodians, and they accepted. This is the wonderful thing. They accepted it. And so that is why the consortium now has to strengthen itself and continue to say, yes, that's what we want. We don't want to be judged by experts.
We have a question in the chat that I think follows up on this. And so Matt asks, that I believe that Grazia indicated there are growing numbers of self-recognized territories of life. What accounts for this increase? And are we also at the same time losing territories of life?
The self recognition and the increasing, I think, is just tiny compared to the immense capacity that is there in the world. It's just that, the communication of the consortium and of many others has been necessarily limited. However, at the same time as I'm saying this, I see like a bulldozer coming through. There are all over the world situations in which pre-existing territories of life are being continuously damaged, attacked, destroyed. And so you have both phenomenon. I don't know where the person who proposed the question comes from, but I suspect that he or she knows both. Situations in which people are recognizing that they have something precious together and they want to keep it. In my own country, it's not I'm not just preaching anything for others. I mean, that's what I like to do for the village where I grew up. And others at the same time who see the horrors coming upon them, and they don't know what to do to limit those horrors. So we are all witnessing this. Frankly, I hardly fall asleep at night thinking about what's happening to fellow human beings, being like me and you and the people you love.
Thank you, Grazia. Liza, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
She probably needs to be unmuted by someone.
I'm working on that, and we will do it. There we go. Sorry about that, Liza, and everybody.
Oh, that's fine. Thanks, Gracia. That was amazing, and I'll definitely read the book. I've downloaded it. I just wanted to ask you, when it comes to just a little bit about your insights on disrupted territories of life. So my question is, how does the vitality in governance interact with conflict resolution, particularly at policy level? So the manifesto may address, the justice aspect, but I'm questioning, how does decoloniality function in the face of ongoing land squeeze or land grabbing? Are these communities, these communities with these sort of custodianship approaches and so on, are they truly being given a chance to shape outcomes, or they are continuously being marginalized? What are your insights, your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you so much. I had prepared some slides on self-determination, but I'm not sure if you want to see them or not. I think your point really is about the struggle that is at the heart of communities around the world about self-determination, which is which cannot be solved in a general way. You need to go on a case-by-case situation. And as I tried to say before, one element is the strengthening, the togetherness of the community. Is not by chance that the first thing that outsiders come and try to do when they want, let's say, to start a mine or to start a major infrastructure and they don't have yet the permission, they try to divide a community. They try to separate some from the others and thereby disaggregate what could be a strong defense. So on the one hand, yes, it is very important to keep strong and go through the process of self-awareness, self-strengthening, figuring out what we want together. On the other, however, policies are also needed. No matter how strong we can be, forces at play in the world today are major. We cannot just imagine that because we are magically united and we strengthen ourselves, we can resist anything. Unfortunately, this is not the case. So we need both, and we need to work for both, and we need also to have some luck. Unfortunately, luck is also part of what is or is not part of us, of our world. So I have very badly answered your question, Lisa, because I'm afraid that there is no general question, but we need to create that special strength in the communities to be able to resist what comes from outside with the help of something that also may come from outside, from other actors. So that's also why the consortium, I think, has something to offer, because it doesn't say it is all about, let's say, policy. It's all about NGOs. It's all about indigenous peoples. It's all about custodians. It's also about togetherness. It's also about finding in one another the alliances that we need in order to overcome the obstacles. And sorry if my answer is short.
You did very well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful a segue. I think maybe we'll turn to what Colin and I had to present, and I want to just sort of lift up something that Grazia, you say in your book as we enter into this, and in our emails preparing for this, you brought this out, and then I saw it when I was looking through the book. So Grazia writes, a sustainable and just future would include as many territories of life as possible in the world. So let's keep that in mind. It's a concept I'd like you all to keep in mind as you're thinking about this concept, how it applies to your own work, to your own life. And it's a concept that we're working with as well within within the leadership for the Ecozoic and Cicada project. So let me share the screen, and Colin and I will get going here. Continue to share. Okay. So we want to talk to you about territories of life work that's happening within the Center for Indigenous Conservation and Development Alternatives and the leadership for the Ecozoic Project. Colin is a professor in the anthropology department at McGill and is the director of both these programs. I am the law and governance lead in L4E and have engaged with great interest in the question of territories of life, among other things. So here we go. So here, picking up on what Grazia wrote, one thing that we keep, I guess I would say as a beacon on the horizon is this idea, and I'd ask you all to open your imaginations here of every place on Earth is a territory of life. What would that look like? How far are we from it? How can we work towards such a vision? Of course, it's extremely complicated in the modern world. All the pressures of modernity uh, that Gratia hinted to, that are a legacy of, among other things, 600 years of a co-evolution of capitalism and colonialism, and how it's touched down really all over the world now. The predominance of cities, over half the world living in cities, a lot of migration for all kinds of reasons happening of people and other living things. And in the human community, maybe um, uh, a loss of connection to place that is associated with the idea of territories of life. So what this means is that Grazia mentioned disrupted territories of life. There's a lot of them around the world. So what we're doing within Alpharee and Cicada is seeking to envision and work towards Earth is made up entirely of territories of life. And just a point of reference, if you think of where the international community is on this, in the biodiversity world, the goal that's agreed to is 30% by 2030, 30 by 30. So whenever I hear that, I always think, well, what are you saying about the other 70%? So the project here would be 100% as soon as possible, whatever that might be. So Alpharee and Cicada are working basically to engage with communities to either support and enhance territories of life that face outside pressures and threats. So many of these would be the defined territories of life. And then also to imagine and work towards new or restored territories of life. And some of the contexts in which we're doing this are local transboundary watersheds that connect the two universities involved in leadership for the Ecozoic, McGill University in Montreal and the University of Vermont in Burlington. And then also more broadly with Indigenous peoples around the world. So I want to turn it over to Colin, who's been working on these issues for a long time, and can give his sort of opening overview, and then how we're trying to engage in some of this work.
Thanks, Jeff. Well, this slide is our kind of operational model of territories of life as we've developed it for purposes of engaging with community partners, Indigenous peoples, and others. I should maybe just say as well that there a kind of conceptual connection between Cicada, the Center for Indigenous Conservation and Development Alternatives, and Leadership for the Ecozoic would be that Leadership for the Ecozoic is an interdisciplinary initiative toward an ecozoic era, an era of mutually beneficial human to earth relationships. And we see territories of life, this formulation that has emerged from the alliance of the ICCA consortium. We see territories of life as the practical bridge to the ecozoic, or at least many of us do. The main disciplines currently involved in leadership for the ecozoic include ecological economics at University of Vermont and anthropology at McGill University. And we have, Cicada is working with some 40 plus Indigenous partners globally. And it is an engaged research undertaking. Leadership for the Ecozoic is a pedagogical initiative that is working with graduate students and postdoctoral fellows. We have research professionals such as Jeff Garver. We have a cartographer. We have a media specialist working with our fellows, and that pedagogy is occurring in certain contexts of research engagement as well. So there's some strong kind of intersection between cicada and leadership for the Ecozoic. As mentioned, I've had some engagement with the ICCA consortium now for several years, and Cicada is a member of the ICCA consortium. And there was already, when we joined, a substantial congruence of the themes that we were working with, and they're reflected in this slide. We take as a starting point in engaged research with communities on territory, the idea of collective life projects. It's an idea that really comes out of originated in the context of activism, community level activism in Latin America, and which has gained traction on other continents. And what's unique about these life projects in the way that in territories of life, as Grazia has defined them, is that they are invariably embedded in a rich relationality. We talk these days in anthropology and other disciplines about distinctive ontologies. So really fundamentally different theories of being and of value in the world, and we see those as precious positions from which to conduct an alternative politics, a politics that is alternative to modernist capitalism and modernist hierarchical power politics. So, and of course, territories of life are holistic. They have a number of strands that must be satisfied or they cannot be viable. There needs to be strong, grounded conservation governance. There need to be thriving land and sea-based water livelihoods. There are, of course, local indigenous legalities, but those inevitably provoke the question of how do those relate to legal definitions at the level of the state or in global law and policy. So those three pillars of governance, of livelihoods, of legalities, constitutionalities, also contending with the problems that each of those raise in terms of competition with state jurisdictions for governance powers, in competition with neoliberal extractive ideas of economics that threaten to undermine local livelihoods. Competition for recognition within legal systems necessarily require alliance. And that is at the heart of the trajectory that Grazia described in the development of the ICCA consortium, which in my view is the most important global alliance working toward these conditions of thriving territories of life, of some viable pathway to an ecozoic future. That requires alliances. So the fourth pillar in our diagram is interpeople's alliances. And out of these various commitments, these various necessary dimensions for thriving territories of life, we work with partners at community level, at First Nation level, to identify urgent matters for collaborative research, not research for the sake of research, but research that will inform the ongoing formulation of life projects for thriving territories of life. And I think we could go to the next slide.
Yeah. And a concept that we're that we sometimes find useful, and that we might think of it as one of maybe other possible antitheses of territories of life, is this concept of sacrifice zones. So I happen to was really drawn by this article by Lopez de Souza on sacrifice zones, where he describes them as segregated and stigmatized spaces where the physical and mental health and the quality of life of human beings, but really the broader community of life, are comprised in the name of economic development or progress, but ultimately for the sake of capitalist interests. And so the work that we're doing involves imagining territories of life, restored places in which this kind of sacrifice zone no longer exists. And it calls into question, since the root of the word sacrifice is the same as the root of sacred, what is being held sacred in different contexts? In the dominant regime, in modernity, it seems to be growth and wealth. So how, with a different conception of territories of life, can we imagine different approaches to what the common good is? And we can be informed by places where there may be forms of sacrifice or ways to honor the sacred through, say, honorable harvest, not taking more than you need, or respect and reciprocity, gift ceremony, and so on. So we're applying, one of the places we're applying this concept and exploring how territories of life framing can apply is in these local watersheds. The Chateauguay watershed flows from the Adirondack Mountains in New York State across the border and into the St. Lawrence near the Ganawage reservation of the Kanien'kehá:ka. And the other is the Champlain-Richelieu watershed, Lake Champlain and the Richelieu River, again, flowing from the United States into Canada into the St. Lawrence River. So right away here, by the way, you can see a depiction of territory that is not the only way we can imagine it. So you can also, if you don't know the native land.ca, it's an interesting site to explore, and it shows in many parts of the world whose indigenous or ancestral territory you're on. And in these watersheds, on the western portion, it's Kanien'kehá:ka territory or Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and more to the east. And of course, these are not bright line boundaries, the Wabanaki Confederacy. So you can see, we can look at these spaces in many different ways, and territories of life really calls our attention to that. You can also take out all the boundaries, and here's another depiction of these watersheds and how they look. Just an array of photos taken from in these two watersheds. So a concept and Grazia mentioned this that we're working with is this idea of desired ICCAs, or territories of life. Related to the life plan of new or reconstituted communities that decide to pull themselves together in relation to a common environment, socio-ecological principles, and vision. They develop a common identity for themselves as community. So this, I think, draws back in this quite complex idea of self-identification and self-determination, and how this looks in a really broad use of territories of life framing. May refer to a pre-existing historical situation, or may start anew on the basis of shared values and or hard work for the restoration of specific territory. So I think we acknowledge, in looking at these watersheds as territories of life, that's already a bit complex. You're defining these territories in a way that doesn't come from any particular community. Watersheds are defined by themselves on ecological basis, on the basis of geographical features. There's a practical reason for our pedagogical and research purposes to at least start with this kind of framing. So recognizing that watersheds are about water, which is vital to life. And that within these particular watersheds, we have all kinds of diversity that would be interesting to explore as we try to apply territories of life framing. But then there's this big question that hangs out there. What community or communities are involved in this, in these very, very disrupted territories of life? You have international boundaries, you have state and provincial boundaries, you have, on the Quebec side especially, but certainly not only, huge portions of the watersheds in intensive agriculture. And yet we want to keep this vision of territories of life everywhere on the horizon and see what it means here and now in these watersheds. Colin, I'm sure you have things to add.
Well, I would just say that for me, the kind of intellectual challenge of taking this on pretty late in my career as one of too many projects is that I have worked as an anthropologist in ethnographic settings that are much more on the defined territory of life end of the spectrum. For example, my long-term work with subarctic Crees involves people who have an unbroken history of land tenure systems, of knowledge for the stewardship of a complex web of food resources, but in their own terms, a complex community of relationships, of reciprocity with other life forms. They have big problems with hydroelectricity, with mining, with industrial forestry, and they're coming to quite a diversity of views themselves about how to engage with and sometimes resist and sometimes cooperate with these forces, but at least it's an integral territory, and their own name for it, Iuistsi, which means at one level Cree land or Cree territory in a political sense, but the semantics of that term Iuistsi also mean living land or territory of life, effectively. So there's that kind of contiguity and continuity of territory and a degree of homogeneous Cree perspective on it. The others, and I could make similar comments about the northern Australian tropical seas that I've also worked in with marine hunters, fishers, and gardeners. Yeah, to me, it is very intriguing to think about assuming some responsibility for the place that I spend a lot of my time as a Montrealer, and I have friends in the Chateauguay watershed in particular at the northern edge of the Adirondacks. I have my own sort of land-based connections there as a hunter, and so I'm aware of certain relationalities, certain beauty of place, and have some sense of responsibility for working to build on those elements. But it is, as Jeff has pointed out, it's extraordinarily diverse. There are many pressures. We're dealing with massive problem currently of construction waste dumping in not only the Chateauguay watershed, but it's one that we have done some invested some resources in documenting and in mounting some political opposition to with community partners, led by community partners. We're working also with woodland, indigenous woodland restoration in a couple of settings. But it's a huge problem to sort of deal with the elements that I mentioned earlier: livelihoods, governance, legalities, interpeople's alliances, with millions of people who have never even heard of territories of life. You're beginning and have no concept, even no in native concept of something like that. It's a very tall order, and yet, as Jeff says, that's what lies before us if we're to envision an Earth comprised of territories of life.
Yeah, so we've been up quite a few challenges here, as you can imagine, and this question about what community or communities are involved, maybe we're thinking of more ideological communities, people who embrace the concept and can come together around it. So not less so maybe than physically contiguous communities, at least to the start. So we're also connected with some organic farms, some small farms that are doing life regenerating types of agricultural practices. But the other thing we know very well and are grappling with is these are unceded territories of indigenous peoples, and so we have connections, we are in conversation, and what we hear from there is like, look, the Gani and the Gahaga friends, and many of them will tell us we've always looked at this as a territory of life. And so kind of like get your act together, sort of. So the whole dynamic between indigenous and non-indigenous presence and the heavy colonial history on this land sort of comes into play as well. Both the Ganyangahaga communities and the Abenaki communities most likely or historically were further to the south, and for all kinds of colonial pressures have been moved around in ways that was not to their choice, and moved off of land that they consider territories of life. So this is something that we absolutely need to reckon with. We're seeking some funding. We have been working on pulling together a partnership to try and grapple with these challenges in a community engaged way, in a participatory way. And one of the things that's and this will be the last slide before we open up to people, that we're working with is this idea of the two-row wampum. So this was a treaty represented by this wampum 1613 between the Haudenosaunee and the Dutch. And I'll just let you read if you wish this quote that's taken from the Onondaga Nation's description of the two-row wampum. But it represented two equals, essentially. One row, the ship of the White Brothers, and the other, the canoe with the Haudenosaunee ways. These two vessels traveling down the river side by side, with neither attempting to steer the other. Well, there's been plenty of steering of the other in the history since 1613, and yet the two-row wampum remains as a powerful framing that we may be able to bring in as we grapple to how we can connect to people throughout the territories we're looking at here. We did these watersheds to make sense of them, these territories, as desired territories of life. It's not easy, and so I think you'll find in Grazia's book a lot of examples of it's not nothing this simple, but many of the examples, the ones that I looked are inspiring ways in sort of territories of life hanging together. Not that there aren't risks. In the case of what we're doing here, at least in these watersheds close to McGill in Burlington, we're dealing with heavily disrupted territories of life, and this inspiring but quite challenging idea of desired territories of life, with the idea that this is a starting point towards imagining an Earth moving past the current polycrisis with a vision like one of territories of life everywhere on Earth. So I'm going to stop the sharing there, and Grazia, you may have some thoughts to share, but everyone who's still with us, please feel free to raise your hand or to put something in the chat or the question and answer, and we'll have some time. We'll think together for the rest of our time here together.
I'd like to put you some questions, but first let me hear from your students, because it's or colleagues, because I think it's their session.
Well, hopefully people are thoughtfully pulling those together. I think you could go ahead, Grazia, and we'll still have time to bring in others.
Okay. There are some issues that are faced a little bit everywhere about these things. The most fundamental element in territories of life, I think, is not the territory itself, is not even the community, which is very difficult to find, because today's we are broken communities in many situations. It is the bond. And I struggle to think about a territory that is so large, that is so complex, in which so many migrations have come about, that manages to identify a coherent territory, a coherent communities, and such a rich and difficult bond. And in my completely ignorant perspective, because I certainly know less than nothing about your places, I'm just thinking maybe the cell is too big. Maybe the cell is made of smaller cells. And have you thought about having smaller communities relating to smaller elements of the territory, and then building up the connection, cell by cell, element by element? Would that somehow help out in the work you are doing?
In fact, I think reality has forced us in that direction. Clearly, we've had to work with quite local interlocutors. From the McGill University side, which is mainly oriented to the Shadow Gay watershed is the closest to us. We work with a relatively small community of people that are affiliated with 3 or 4 towns, rural municipalities, rather close to the U.S. border, on that bit of the Adirondacks that pushes into Quebec, and on the skirts of that. That's kind of a place where we begin, and there's some quite rich things going on. There are a few organic farmers. There are people who are involved in woodlot use, but also forest regeneration. There are a number of initiatives of the Nature Conservancy there to both acquire land and to organize conservation easements And so some of the people who are very conservation minded in that area have been local activists, encouraging their neighbors to build out interconnectivity of protected areas. And we're talking very small in some cases. You know, the town of Franklin is enthusiastic currently about developing an area that I think it amounts to about 200 hectares. It's not a lot of land. When you look at the size of, there's lots of single fields out there that are more than 200 hectares. And then we have in the Champlain watershed, McGill University has kind of a research site, but also a public access site to something called the Galt Nature Reserve. And so we are, you know, we are thinking along some of the lines that you've suggested about building out interconnections between the two watersheds, and of course over the border into Vermont and upstate New York. And just because of people's the kind of biographies of some of the leadership for the Ecozoic folks at Burlington, Vermont, they've engaged with different sets of local interlocutors and allies but community level organizations, watershed level organizations, we're starting to we've been developing conversations with them toward the funding initiative that Jeff mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and we had a question here about, well, what about private yards? And at University of Vermont, there is a project that we're looking at bringing in here, just of people attaching to their lawns, to those spaces in a different way. I don't know if anyone from UVM wants to talk about that. The other thing about, I would say, what's interesting about the Galt Reserve is that McGill also has a memorandum of agreement with the Abenaki Nation, acknowledging their historical connection, and so that's another starting point that's attached to bit.
And there are Abenaki elders and knowledge experts who are involved in public education, in part through McGill courses.
Matt, if you wanna, or someone else, Liza, or someone wants to just talk about the urban agroecology work with lawns and how that connects here. Some tech whiz could maybe help us bring their voice into the space.
Liza, go for it.
I wanted to say, Matt, go for it so I can give space to others.
Oh no, you've been more directly involved recently.
Oh, okay. So through the ecological economics applied class, we did the first sort of iteration of doing lawn conversions with landowners here in Burlington. So we did some demonstration plots last spring, and the class is ongoing again this spring. And again, we're going to do some more demonstration plots. However, we are sort of also having other pieces of the project, like our communication campaign, which is called Lawns to Life. So we are really working at a lot of things with this project, also including a survey that we did in the fall, trying to establish the constraints and the motivations for lawn conversion, and looking at like the value action gap, like why people might have specific values but would rather like not convert or convert, like what's going on. So we're busy with the data analysis for that. Yeah, so really looking at also how to build in ethical foundations into sort of conservation through that project. So that we're doing a lot. So the students are busy, it's exciting. We're also doing a collaboration with UVM, doing a food forest with the UVM horticulture farm, all in efforts to really convert these lawns into diverse urban agroecosystems. And also we have an emphasis on foodscapes, because we're trying to also bring in the part of sharing food, which is divergent from like a market, food-based system. Yeah, so that's the work we are doing, very participatory action research, really, working on that. Thank you.
Thanks. Liza, I think maybe just to follow up on this, Matt had a question that brings it back to you, Grazia, that you may have in terms of like starting points that you talked about your community and what you're doing that sort of brings your territories of life perspective right down to home.
There is a very challenging question in the chat that I was thinking about, because it's actually a question also that that touches some very difficult point, because governance ideally is well set up, is respecting all sorts of criteria, blah blah. And however, often you find conflicting governance situations in which you would like to have a territorial governance according to a particular community. And then you find, as you were saying before, Jeff, that you have, even different countries and then different sub-nations and levels of the region and the local municipality. And then within the municipality, you have political parties. And I find in my own personal experience that a sort of, I would not want to use the term enemy because I'm trying to demilitarize my own language. I'm so anti-militaristic in these days that I don't know what I would do, but it's just like political parties tend to somehow not seeing really the territories in many situations, while people who go beyond the party have the bond that is more concrete. This is a generalization, and I don't want to go very much for it, but often there is this dilemma. And so the question raised in the chat, which I think I lost the chat, but it was, if someone could read it, it would be.
Is that Ben Mansky's?
Yeah, I think so.
I could speak to it if I'll read it myself.
Yes, please.
And thank you for addressing it.
Please,
So
Ben, because it is a very important one. Yeah.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you. Yeah, I'm interested in the intersection of territories of life and the jurisdictional territories of local states, meaning municipalities in the context of the United States, counties, regional governments, regional authorities, and both of these also how they intersect and overlap with digital territoriality, because, and I'm interested in this because it's something we are attempting here with one of our projects that's very active here in Northern Virginia called Democratizing Nova. So I provided a link to that. And we're building capacity for participatory planning across these many different counties and communities, as we put it, from the Shenandoah to the Potomac. So that's a very large territory of life that's got some bioregional, underpinnings to it. And we're using digital technology, actually Decidim, to begin to weave it together. So the question was, generally speaking, is there any advice on how to negotiate these kinds of intersections and overlays? Thank you.
Yeah, and that's one of the most difficult challenges I think we can identify, is similar to the challenge that I find in general in society when we have a narrative that conflicts deeply with another narrative. For someone, tariffs are the best thing under the sun. For others are a tax. For others are the beginning of inflation. You know, it's just like the narrative and the worldview that is behind the narratives are multiple. And so how do we navigate that multiplicity, which is on the one hand, like diversity of life, it is part of what makes our life most wonderful, and on the other creates all the complications that we have. So the only very difficult, very exhausting advice I have is just let's try to talk. Let's be there and communicate. Like what we were saying before, let's try to build those alliances, or maybe even with that double parallel line, if we cannot live perfectly together, meshing and creating the joint communities, let's try to be in peace. Let's try to keep our own different communities, different territories of life with exchanges, and not with fights, not with militarization, not with aggressiveness, which is, at the end of the day, the only advice I'm trying to give to myself and to everybody else. Let's try not to waste the little wonderful time that we have on this planet by hitting each other. And instead, that what, and let not, I don't want to go into that because I would bore you.
Yeah, that, you know, I appreciate the hopefulness in there, and it makes me think of the difference. So sometimes people will bring in the question of, well, aren't you just talking about bioregionalism? And there are certainly overlaps. There is a lot of good intention that I think is found in both of those conversations. This is my own view, what Territories of Life brings in to sharper focus. And, you know, Grazia, you wrote about a sustainable and just future. It brings more directly into the conversation, especially in this part of the world, but it's many parts of the world, Indigenous and non-Indigenous relations, and that long history and all of the legacies of the harmful legacies of that history. I think it puts them front and center, and that's why I think we ended here with at least invoking this idea of the Turo wampum, which also has history. It's over 400 years that was agreed to, and there's hopefully power, and to me a strong connection to justice in that in the Turo wampum idea. Colin and Grazia, we're near the end. Maybe you want to just say some last words before we thank everybody for joining us here.
Colin.
Well, I maybe just a word of regret that there's some nice questions left in the chat that we're not going to get to, but to acknowledge them at least. Yeah, some nice thought from
land back movement and so on.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess maybe one thing I could say that relates in some way to at least one of those interventions is that the difference between bioregionalism and territories of life, to me, is there is a focus on connection to place, on love of place, on establishing focusing on those relations of reciprocity that don't necessarily need to come from long, deep histories of cultural attachment, but also come from personal engagement of anyone with getting sufficiently immersed in place to have those relations of love and to convert those into politics, alliance building with like-minded souls.
Mm-hmm. After all, we have only one life, and we have the time of the life to build those relations. And, you know, we can feel them from the past, but we need to build them and to nourish them during the time we have.
Yes.
And that's a beautiful note for us to us end on. Please, everybody here, let's keep this conversation and this good feeling going. This was wonderful. Gracia, especially thank you on short notice for joining us, and thanks to Next System folks for giving us this opportunity.